Good morning. I'm Jason Mercier, the Government Reform Director for the Washington Policy Center. I want to thank you all for joining us for our April 8th virtual event policy session. I want to be giving some update on what's happened recently with the state's income tax battle, and I'll be joined later on by my colleague Liv Finne, our Education Director, to give an update on what's happening in the current situation with the school closures and some of our recommendations on how to help students and parents move forward. This session is being recorded, so it will be available later on once our broadcast concludes. But for now, let me start with some good news about what our state Supreme Court did last Friday. You'll recall that there has been an ongoing effort to bring the state of Washington a graduated income tax. And this is despite the fact that the voters on 10 straight occasions have rejected efforts to impose an income tax, including 6 constitutional amendments. The voters have said no, thank you. So with the electorate not cooperating and there not being support for a constitutional amendment, advocates for an income tax have gotten creative. They've decided, since we can't get the voters to cooperate, maybe we can convince the courts to do our work for us. So the supporters of this have been going around trying to find a willing city council to knowingly and willfully pass an illegal income tax. And they found a very cooperative group of officials in the city of Seattle. So the Seattle City Council back in 2017 passed what they knew was an illegal graduated income tax. Not only did it violate the Constitution, but it violated several state laws prohibiting local income taxes. And this got us thinking, what are they thinking? Why are they doing this? So we did records requests, and among the records that we got were the details between the city officials and a private liberal group on how they were trying to cook up this scheme, knowing they would be sued and hoping that they can go to the Supreme Court and get 5 judges to do something the voters won't and say that you don't own your income, that income is not property, and therefore a constitutional amendment is not needed any longer to impose a graduated income tax. So they partly got what they wanted. They were immediately sued. This went to King County Superior Court, and King County Superior Court said, you can't do this. It's against the Constitution. It's against state law. It went to the Court of Appeals, and things went a little bit sideways there, which we'll talk about in a moment. But just last Friday, the state Supreme Court basically told Seattle not even to waste its time. It was not even going to hear this challenge. So not only are they not going to rule on it, they just rejected the case outright. Now, what this means is that there is not an appetite on the Supreme Court to change its mind, to do something that no other court has done over the past 100 years, to say that we don't own our income. So this is very important because it means, for now at least, the justices are going to keep with what they have done in the past and say, if you want a graduated income tax, you've got to amend the Constitution. Where things kind of go a little sideways, though, and why we're going to have to stay very vigilant, is by rejecting this case, by refusing to hear it. That means the appeals court decision stands. And I mentioned that things got a little bit weird at the appellate level last year. The Court of Appeals did 3 things when it heard this case. The first was what everybody expected. It said Seattle's specific graduated income tax was unconstitutional. But then it did 2 more things that we are still scratching our heads over. The first thing it did is it said that the explicit state law passed by the legislature, a 1-page bill passed in 1984, that explicitly prohibits local governments from imposing an income tax is unconstitutional. The appeals court said that that 1-page bill banning a local income tax violated the state's single subject clause, and therefore that prohibition was unconstitutional. But that wasn't enough to allow a local income tax, because local governments do not have taxing authority unless they are given it by the legislature. So the third thing that the appellate court did is said, since income is property, and we know that the legislature has given municipalities authority to tax property, therefore every local government in the state of Washington has authority to impose a flat 1% income tax. Now, the problem with this is that statute that gives local property tax authority exempts intangible personal property. And intangible personal property is defined to include money. And somehow the city of Seattle convinced the appellate court that income is not money. So where we stand right now with what the state Supreme Court did on Friday, they are not going to hear the Seattle challenge. They are not going to revisit their prior rulings saying that you own your income and income is property and it requires a constitutional amendment for a graduated income tax. But by allowing that appeals court decision to stand, saying that the state law prohibiting a local income tax was unconstitutional, and cities have authority to tax income through their property tax authority, that means right now, every local government, every municipality with property tax authority can impose a flat 1% income tax. And we have already seen the mayor of Seattle say that they're going to look at how they can take advantage of this new authority. This also means you may see other city councils take a look at whether or not they want to impose a flat 1% income tax. And we have been involved with other municipalities, and particularly in the city of Spokane, Spokane Valley, and Granger, who want to make it very clear to their employers and to their citizens they're not going to go down this road. So anticipation of what the Supreme Court did, Spokane, Spokane Valley, and Granger have passed explicit prohibitions on local income taxes. But ultimately, you don't want this to be a city-by-city response. And that's why this legislative session, there were multiple bipartisan bills proposed with both Republican and Democratic sponsors that would have simply reinstated that 36-year-old law banning a local income tax. And most disappointingly, the majority Democrats in charge of the legislature would not even give these bills public hearings. So not only did they not take action on them, consider them, but they wouldn't even take public comment on them. This is very concerning because it indicates that the current majority in the legislature may be wanting to further open this door to an income tax in the state of Washington. And one way that they're going to try to do this is through these efforts that they are continually doing for a capital gains income tax. And just to make it perfectly clear that you don't have to take my word for it, that a capital gains tax is in fact an income tax and not an excise tax, let's take a look at what the Internal Revenue Service for the federal government says. So I'm going to share on your screen right now an email, or excuse me, a letter from the IRS to my representative, Newhouse here in the Tri-Cities, addressing this question very head on. Is a capital gains tax an excise tax or an income tax? And you can see here in no uncertain terms, the IRS makes it crystal clear, a capital gains tax is an income tax. So that is how the federal government defines a capital gains tax. Well, in fact, every state across the country also defines a capital gains tax as an income tax. And in fact, tax experts across the world do the same thing. So why are we even having this discussion knowing that it takes a constitutional amendment to impose a graduated income tax? I'm going to share with you again on your screen an email from one of the proponents of this effort in the legislature, Senator Peterson. And Senator Peterson has confirmed in this email to an economist who's been pushing for an income tax why this is happening. And you'll see in that second paragraph, this entire effort is to do basically what Seattle just failed in doing. And that is to set up a lawsuit to see if they can get the Supreme Court to revisit whether or not we own our income, to see if they can get the Supreme Court to strike down that prohibition so the legislature can enact an across-the-board income tax with a simple majority vote, since the voters won't allow a constitutional amendment. So I don't know how much more clear it can get what the legislative intent is behind these efforts. And in fact, we have already seen in response to the COVID-19 crisis and the oncoming budget deficit that we know we're facing, advocates for an income tax trying to use this current crisis as an excuse for the legislature to impose this capital gains income tax. With this email from Senator Peterson, we know again this effort is to set up another Supreme Court challenge to try to open the door to broad income taxes. So you will probably see op-eds. There's one in the Seattle Times today. You'll probably see some other ones from these advocates of the income tax saying, this is now the perfect time to impose a capital gains income tax to help us balance our budget. Now, for those who are familiar with what capital gains taxes are, you may be thinking to yourself, well, this is actually the worst possible time you could do that, especially considering what is happening with the stock market right now. Because if you think about taxes on a stream of volatility, stable to extremely volatile. Property taxes are stable. Gross receipts taxes, which are the B&O tax, are a little more volatile, but still stable. Sales taxes starting to get into some volatility, but income taxes, corporate income taxes, and capital gains income taxes are the most volatile sets of income sources. And this is why you are seeing states across the country that rely on these revenue streams having the same type of budget problems that the state of Washington is facing. And let's bring up the former governor of California here, explaining the problems that California budgets had with relying on unpredictable capital gains. It is the worst possible revenue source that you would want to try to rely on, especially in an economic downturn.
Well, Jason, I was just able to get on and I didn't hear a word that you said in your presentation. So I'm not exactly sure at what point did your audio cut out for everyone else as well. So my guess is that you should probably backtrack and repeat the last 5 minutes or so of your presentation, because I think your audio cut out. Yeah, and Liv's acknowledging that your audio cut out very early on in your presentation. So if you just want to, in a way, start over with a nutshell, and then, we got your first couple of minutes. After that, just consider it dead and start over.
All right, well, the vast conspiracy to keep the income tax alive in the state of Washington is by, I guess, muting our presentations now, huh? So where we stand basically with what the Supreme Court did last Friday is the door has been closed for now from the court for a graduated income tax. But by allowing that appeals court ruling to stand, every local government has the authority now to impose a flat 1% income tax. And we've already seen Seattle say they're going to try to take advantage of that. There were bills in the legislature to try to stop this. They were bipartisan bills, but they were not even given a courtesy of a public hearing, which indicates that there is going to be motivation and intent in the legislature to try to set up a new lawsuit to get the Supreme Court to allow a graduated income tax without a constitutional amendment. And hopefully with the screen shares earlier, you were able to see some of those source documents about how they plan to use the capital gains tax to set up this lawsuit. So where we stand for right now is it's going to be important for the legislature to try the next time it's in session to reinstate that 36-year-old ban, so you don't have a patchwork of income taxes throughout the state at various city levels. To do, if you are a local government official, to do what Spokane Valley, and Granger have done, and impose your own local income tax ban, just to communicate to citizens, to employers, that you're going to maintain that competitive advantage. And we're going to be continuing our effort to encourage other cities to do the same. But we'll also need to make sure we stay very, very vigilant right now on these efforts to impose a capital gains income tax, as we know the motivation is to set up another lawsuit to try to succeed where Seattle failed and get the Supreme Court to allow that to move forward without a vote of the people. From the standpoint of a policy beyond the legality, if you are hearing advocates saying we must have a income tax, a capital gains tax to help us balance our budgets right now because of the COVID-19 situation, that is just kind of a laughable economic position when you consider that capital gains in particular are the most volatile source of revenue in a tax structure, and particularly in a recession, because you're not seeing those gains usually occur. And we can see that bear out right now with the stock market. So there is no recession-proof tax structure. You try to weather a recession by having your base budgets built with fiscal discipline and having strong reserve accounts. We at least have some reserves to help us weather us through this. But by saying that we're going to impose an income tax, a capital gains income tax, and that's going to help us balance our budget, if that was the case, you would not be seeing California and New York right now, who heavily rely on those taxes, having budget deficits in their state. And in fact, those states are trying to take the opposite approach, trying to reduce the reliance on capital gains because they are so undependable. So going forward, we need to reinstate that local income tax ban. We need to stop the efforts for the capital gains income tax. But all in all, that ruling on Friday from the Supreme Court was tremendously important because it signals, for now at least, there are not 5 judges willing to strike 100 years of case law and allow a graduated income tax without a constitutional amendment. So that's hopefully between the beginning and the end, that gives you a snapshot of what has happened. And I know after Liv goes through her presentation, we'll go through some questions.
All right, thanks, Jason. Let's see if we can connect up with Liv. There we go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Great. Liv Finne, our Center for Education Director. Thanks so much for being here this morning. A lot of technical difficulties, but such is the nature of things these days with how crowded the internet is. Liv, you've been doing a lot of work, particularly since schools, or ironically, I should say, since schools have shut down. So tell us about what's happening in your world of research, and then we'll get to a Q&A session afterward. I want to remind people, as Liv is talking, if a question comes up for Jason or Liv at any point in time, you can put it in the chat function there on your toolbar for the GoToWebinar, in the GoToWebinar toolbar there, and we'll be collecting those for the Q&A afterward. Liv, welcome, and go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dave. Good morning. My name is Liv Finne. I'm the Director for Education at the Washington Policy Center. Thank you for joining us today. Before I go any further, I want to commend you, to make sure that you notice on our website, we have a special dedicated page where all of our analysts are putting their recommendations for what to do in this COVID-19 crisis. And you'll see there the recommendations that Jason is making, that I am making, that the Small Business Director is making, that the Environmental Director is making. It's a really great one-stop shop for what our state should be doing to help our people in this very difficult time. And if anyone has been hard hit, it's the parents and families of the schools in Washington state. So I'm going to do just a little overview so everybody can know what actually happened. You'll recall we all started to worry about the coronavirus coming here in the early March. It was kind of a slow, late February, early March, people are starting to realize this is a problem, this is going to be a problem. On March 12th, the governor closed all the schools in Washington state, including private schools. And immediately, Superintendent Michelle Reed of the North Shore School District, who had been getting prepared, moved to online instruction. She had distributed 2,500 laptops to students that didn't have one and made internet access available to students that didn't have it. And immediately that school district went online with instruction. Of course, online instruction is nowhere near as good as in-person instruction, but she was doing the best she could under difficult circumstances. And then, to everyone's shock, the superintendent of public instruction shut her down, saying that for considerations of equity, because not all special needs students, that's about 13% of the population, can be served with online instruction, no child will be served with online instruction. So because of the disabilities of a small percentage of our population, no student would be getting any online instruction anywhere in the state of Washington, which was evidence of what happens in a system that really has what's a good word? We have the public school system is not responsive to the needs of its families, as this coronavirus shutdown has dramatically shown. Because the public school system has a guaranteed income stream, it doesn't have to be responsive. If you look at what's happened with the private schools and the public charter schools, those schools are very attuned to what their families expect and want. And most of the charter schools and many private schools went immediately to online instruction, and providing a very stark contrast to what the public schools did. So here we were at the end of, towards the end of March, Reichdahl had shut down all online instruction in the public schools. And then the U.S. Department of Education got involved and sent out a directive saying that the law on special education had been broadly misunderstood, that it was incorrect to interpret that law to foreclose education for all children, and that districts were to do the best they could to provide an education to all children online. And with that, our Superintendent Reichdahl reversed course, and on March 30th instructed all the schools to do the best to go online with instruction. So then the coronavirus, of course, has its own life, and there's great concern over where we are in the transmission of the virus. Have we reached our peak? Are we on the downside of the peak? Washington State is looking very good on all the statements made by the coronavirus task force that the President Trump has on the TV every day. They're saying that Washington State has done an extremely good job in keeping the transmission of this virus low. So that is very good news for our state. But now on Monday, the governor has decided to close schools for the rest of the school year. So there will be no school for the rest of the school year. And this throws everything in uncertain, of course, an additional uncertainty, because it is very possible that we, being so far ahead of the curve, that Washington State will be able to, that the workers of Washington State will be safe to go back to work within a matter of weeks, but there's still 14 weeks left of the school year. And parents may well see the prospect of being allowed to go back to school, yet their children can't go. Parents will be able to go back to work, but children will not be able to go back to school. And so we have recommended that the best solution, we have for many years observed that the public school system is delivered by monopoly regional entities, districts that are very bureaucratic, that are under the control of a union, that are unable to be responsive to the needs of families, that maintain failed learning models year after year after year. And this coronavirus is how the system responded to the coronavirus has just underscored all the points we've been making. And it should be increasing pressure on our legislature to allow parents more options. And parents do not have enough options given this situation. And so we are calling for giving parents a portion of the funding that is still left to provide education in the system. So yesterday I posted an article suggesting that parents be given the sum of $2,000 for every child so that they can buy a laptop, get access to the internet, and buy curricula that is tailored to the needs of their unique student. And there is $17 billion that we spend each year in our schools from all revenue. And now the schools are not delivering about 1/3 of the school year. So it should be possible for our lawmakers to provide some of that money directly as a credit, in the form of a credit, to parents, so parents can assist their children get educated. So that is going to be our main focus, asking for additional options and funding for parents, so they are able to keep their children learning and progressing in school through the rest of the school year, the next 14 weeks, and through the summer if necessary. So we are hearing, as Jason said, that there's likely to be a special session to deal with what we expect to be falling revenues to the budget. And I'm watching the union scramble, trying to figure out what its message will be. And so there's great uncertainty, you can tell, because I'm hearing conflicting messages. The Superintendent Reichdahl was on the radio a couple days ago, just before the announcement of the governor on April 6th to close the schools. I heard on the radio in the morning of April 6th that he thinks that Reichdahl was recommending that perhaps students would get makeup days for the days of school that they're losing this year. And now that, of course, is a disingenuous recommendation, because anyone who is familiar with education knows that if additional time is going to be required of teachers to give to students over and above the contracted amount, that the union will demand extra funding. So for the leader of our public school system to be saying that we are going to need an extra days of school in this time of lost days of school is a shocking statement, given the fact that our budget will certainly be declining from falling revenues, because in this time when parents are not getting access to the school that they're paying for, they should certainly not be asked for more, to pay more money to make up for the days that they've already paid for. So that is what I'm following and watching. We will be recommending and saying that the purpose of public education is to educate the children, not to maintain a very well-funded system of monopoly schools. The purpose of education is to help parents educate their children. And in a time of crisis like the coronavirus, we should give some funding to help parents do that job. Obviously, the schools are not at fault for this coronavirus. Everyone is suffering equally under it. But we need to keep focused on what the paramount duty of our state is, and that is to provide for the education of the child, not to maintain expensive institutions. And so to keep our focus on helping parents who are really struggling. I mean, it must be very terrible for parents that have lost their paychecks. We know that's happening. Unemployment claims have soared. We know that restaurants are closing. We know that people that are in the travel business are losing their jobs. And we know that people are worried about their paychecks. So we need to help parents with some assistance from the state so they can educate their children. It's consistent with what the CARES Act passed by Congress and signed by Trump is doing. As you've heard, the average family of four will soon receive a check of worth $3,400 to help them through this crisis. So to give parents another $2,000 per child to help them educate their children is consistent with what the federal government is doing. And so that is the focus. We will be trying to keep the focus on the parents and the children, and try to put a balance in the discussion over what will happen in the schools coming forward. Next week we have I encourage you all to, if you're sitting at home and what else are you doing, I encourage you all to sign up for our virtual Solutions Summit next week on the 14th, April 14th and April 15th. You can sign up for that on our website. We have panel session discussions on the various subjects that we cover at Washington Policy Center, and my session will be on April 15th with Representative Vicki Kraft, and she will discuss the bill that she introduced last session, which is now, with the coronavirus here and among us, her bill could be seen to be prophetic. She proposed to allow families a scholarship to send their children to another school if the public school is not serving them well. And think of what parents could do with that money right now. They could sign up for a private school that is delivering effective online education when their public school is not doing that. So her bill, we will discuss, I think it's at 9:40 on the 15th of April, which is a week from today. And I urge you to come and listen to her talk about her bill. And I will be speaking about other school options, other scholarships that are given in other states to various targeted groups of families to help them get what they need in the private system. Because the research is showing very clearly that the more options you give parents, the better off the students are. That's the first thing. But it also provides a competitive force that will influence the public school system to improve itself. And that's what we don't have today sufficiently, because the public school system does exactly as I described to you. One fine superintendent in North Shore tries to deliver online education, and she's shut down by the state superintendent because the union's unhappy to see any one district do better than another. It's competition. It's contrary to the whole competitive model in the private sector, where your competitors make you better. You work hard to find out what they're doing. You try to do better and better for your customers, and in that way you deliver excellence. And this, in places where you have, in districts where you have large numbers of public charter schools, for example, the traditional system is doing is doing is responding by improving services for families. And this has been shown by empirical research. So that is why we strongly think that the more giving parents more options for education will improve the quality of the schools of the children in the traditional system, because the traditional system will respond by improving its services. So that is essentially what I'm working on. I'm more than happy to take questions and discuss it. It's quite an interesting situation. I'm also very interested in hearing from you what you're hearing from your own districts and families and grandchildren about what's happening in the public schools, because I can use that information to perhaps let everyone else know about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Liv. My name is David Bose. I'm the Communications Director for Washington Policy Center. We're going to go to the Q&A now. I want to start with Liv. I'm gonna make my camera disappear so that you get the 2 stars on the screen rather than myself, and I'll be like the voice of God coming over when a new question comes up. You can enter a new question into the chat function at any time. We'll be collecting those and asking them as they come. We've got quite a backlog right now, a lot of people with questions. I want to start with you, Liv. Just to clarify something, there is a listener a viewer rather, who would like to know, does this mean, is it currently state policy that teachers will get, and administrators and school staff will get full pay, even though there's no actual education going on right now of the students? How is that, and is there talk about cutting that back and doing what the private sectors had to do? Can you clarify that for us?
Well, I'll tell you, the week of March, I heard that on March 24th, so this is like 10 days ago or so, the districts had all rushed in and reached new collective bargaining agreements with their unions to allow for emergency leave due to coronavirus, and therefore full pay under their contracts. So that was the first thing the unions did, and that's why there was such a delay, I think, in deciding what to do. This is the situation we have. We have a monopoly system run by unions that thinks about its own interests first. Now, you can understand that teachers, like everyone else, are afraid of losing their paychecks in this time. And we want to protect teachers. We don't want them all to be unemployed. It's no fault of theirs that this coronavirus came down. However, there is a way to focus on where the money is going in public education. As I've written many times, only about half of the employees in the public schools are actually teachers. So there is plenty of administrative bloat and extra spending going on in the public schools that could be trimmed down quite easily and then redeployed to help parents educate their children. But so that's what's happening.
Jason, this question's for you. It relates to finances and the state budget. Governor Inslee vetoed bills to save money for COVID-19. Can you share where those cuts were made, and also how much money did it actually generate for the state's battle against the virus, and who will have oversight of that money?
Well, thank you, Dave. Yeah, so the governor did take action on Friday, as well as that Supreme Court ruling on the supplemental budget, and he executed, I think it was an unprecedented 147 line items in that budget. And these were things big and small. Small things like yet another study for a state-run bank. That was about $225,000. That was vetoed out. Big things, school counselors. The legislature created basically a $50 million slush fund, if you want, for some of their environmental policies. He vetoed that out. All in all, over the 4-year period, it bought about $400 million of capacity of savings. Now, this base budget still was an increase, and it's a supplemental budget, so we were still spending more than what was part of the original budget. But by issuing these vetoes, by taking proactive action now, it leaves more money in the ending fund balance, it leaves more money in the reserves, and we know we're going to need that. When you shut down a state economy, you're not going to be getting the D&O tax receipts, you're not going to be getting the sales tax receipts, you're not going to be getting the real estate excise tax receipts because that type of property transaction was also basically put on hold, and especially realizing the multiplier effect that the construction industry has in the state by shutting down all of the residential and most of the commercial construction. That money's not going to be coming in. So it was very good to see that proactive action taken. As far as the oversight, it basically just puts money back into the ending fund balance. And what we'll know in about a week and a half, we're going to have our very first economic report of the monthly tax collections. That's going to fully account for what has happened in this past month. So at that point, we're going to get a pretty good feel for how far off our revenue forecast is likely to be in June. But this is all dependent upon how long this government shutdown of the economic activity continues. I mean, in this past week, you saw 3,500% increase in unemployment insurance claims. I mean, that dwarfs what we saw during the Great Depression. So this is going to be a rough patch, which is why it's going to be so important to start to try to ramp up that economic activity as soon as we can.
Jason, a quick follow-up on that from a viewer. The governor, one of the first things he signed was an increase in the B&O tax. Has there been any hint from the governor's office or from other legislative leadership that the tax increase will go away, particularly since so many of those businesses are already struggling to stay afloat?
Yeah, one of the recommendations that we made after he issued that stay home, stay healthy directive, shutting down a lot of what they deem non-essential businesses, is made a call that from the time of that emergency proclamation to 30 days after it expires, the legislature and the governor should totally waive all state tax liability for those employers, because they're going to need the liquidity to be able to keep their payroll going. So you've seen some of that come from the federal government with the forgivable loans, some of the loans from the Small Business Administration. This is different than any other economic downturn we have ever experienced because it's caused by a shutting of the doors. It's not through inefficiency in supply chains or employers that are not having a good business models. The government has shut their doors. So keeping that payroll going, keeping people with jobs to come back to should allow us to snap back quickly. But we have made the call for waiving that tax liability for those employers until 30 days after this ends. You have seen some discussion as well with the deferral of the property tax deadlines. Should there be additional relief provided for that? I know Liv has had some recommendations as far as what to do with some of the school funding, since the parents are now basically having to be their own teachers for the rest of the school year. But I haven't seen calls yet come from the governor or from other lawmakers about repealing some of the tax increases that they passed. But you would think that would be the natural first place to start.
Liv, why don't we follow up with that, since Jason brought it up, based on your recommendations and whether or not, I mean, I've had a number of people ask, what happens to this graduating class? Do they have to redo the year next year so it'll be double the size, or can they finish on their own, or do we have any idea at this point?
Well, the State Board of Education is working to waive requirements for graduating seniors. So I suspect that seniors will be able to graduate. They want them to move along to the next step. I expect that will happen. The seniors will be able to graduate, and that we will not have, and that children will be moved to the next grade level without passing the classes that they have before them this semester. I have heard that children are not being graded on their work, which it just shows you, which of course, after a certain age, a child requires to be graded in order to put in the effort to learn, as we all know. So it shows you how they have not thought this through at all. But and of course, we didn't expect them to an unexpected event like this. We didn't expect this public schools to be perfect by any means. However, they've had some time to get their act together. I mean, they were closed down on March 12th. This is now a month ago, and they still haven't figured out that they really should be grading students. They were not prepared. In this state with so many so many fantastic tech industries here, we had the city of the Seattle Public Schools had failed to provide children sufficient numbers of laptops in and so that Amazon had to come in to provide 8,200 laptops to students in Seattle Public Schools. They were caught flat-footed, unprepared, and then they not only were they unprepared for this, but then they didn't get prepared. They thought about their paychecks is essentially what they did, and they got all muddled up in their thinking about equity and their mistaken notions that we can't give any student instruction because all students won't get instruction. That's what's really confused them, and that's why they haven't delivered. And that's because they do not have the pressure of pleasing parents, that they will get their money regardless, and that is why they've done so badly. And I expect that they will just waive all the requirements for students and move them along to the next year. That's what I think.
Dave, to follow up quickly on what Liv said, the legislature, before it concluded its session, did pass a law waiving, basically holding harmless seniors, so they would not be punished through the actions of the schools being closed.
But yeah, I guess the follow-up would be, is it a punishment to make sure that they actually get the full education before they graduate, or is that just part of the deal? I guess we'll have to wait and see. But Jason, there's a number of people that have a variation of the following question, which is, given the likelihood of a special session to deal with the state budget crunch, how concerned are you that, and how likely do you think it is that they'll use this as this budget shortfall as an excuse to pass a capital gains income tax, an income tax on capital gains, and do exactly what they were trying to do through the courts?
The chances of them proposing and advocating a capital gains tax is 100%. We've already seen lawmakers and the income tax agitators say that that's their goal, that's their plan. I think that the challenge that they're going to face is, how do you generate a fiscal note on a revenue source that basically doesn't exist right now because of what you're seeing happen in the stock market and in consumer activity. So they will 100% propose it. I think that's going to be an incredible challenge to try to fiscal note that and to try to say that we can rely on this money for our budget. The other thing you have to keep in mind with capital gains is, unlike the B&O tax, the property tax, the sales tax, it's collected once a year when you file your federal income taxes. It's part of your federal income tax. So they won't even know what to expect until April 15th of next year. So short answer, they're going to propose it. I just don't think in this climate they're going to be able to pass the straight face test that they can rely on it for their budget.
Well, can I say something about the property taxes for schools?
Sure.
As you all know, the legislature has raised the state property tax for schools in the McCleary decision in 2017. And then as part of that, there was a promise to keep local property taxes low at $1.50 per thousand. Then in 2018, they lifted that limit of $1.50 per thousand to $2.50 per thousand. And then this last session, they tried to raise it to $3 per thousand. So I think that if you were a lawmaker that was trying to help the taxpayers of Washington State who's seen their property taxes, dramatically increase, if you were serious about trying to help the people who are keeping our economy going, who are paying their revenues into the state budget, you would be talking about reversing some of these property tax increases. And especially in light of the fact that the schools have been closed, because a lot of that money is going to schools that are now closed. So let's think through this again. Was it really necessary to double the amount of money that we've given to the schools when we get a coronavirus and they shutter? This is not a working system. We're pouring money into a school system that is not responding well to our needs. And the best fix in this time is to reassess, where's the money going, Why isn't it being delivered in the ways that families need it? How do we reform our schools so we actually get better quality outcomes for all the students in Washington State? And that way we keep pushing is, alternate models of education, public charter schools, expand the number of public charter schools, expand scholarships to private schools, create a competitive system to the public system. That is the way to get more for the money that we give and much better results for students. So this is an opportunity to point out the failings of the public schools and to help taxpayers by reduce the burden on them. I think that's a message we should be giving to our lawmakers, loud and clear.
Liv, I think you've hit a little bit on this question, but it's similar to what you were just talking about, but it's a little bit bigger, which is, do you think that the situation that the school system finds itself in right now and parents find themselves in is a total game changer? Because we've been told time and again that kids can't learn without new facilities, without X, Y, and Z. There needs to be more administration, more staff. And now with the state facing an emergency, people are looking at all these online options, and you have state officials who previously said learning can't take place without more. They're acknowledging that learning can take place without more. And so this will forever be an example going forward where people will point back to it and say, we were able to do this, or students were able to do that. And so why shouldn't there be this flexibility within the system? So I guess they just want you to address the idea that we're in a game changer moment for the education system.
I strongly agree with that, Dave. I mean, you can make the argument that we're today in many households, parents are doing more with less. And so I think the thoughts around, do we really need all these huge buildings all the time? Should we be at school every day of every week? Do we, people are rethinking the model of education. It's a very exciting time. What is it that a child really needs? Is it really a standardized program that is force-fed down the poor child's throat from K through 12? Or should we allow the child to explore his interests? Like, you can bet that there are a lot of families right now that are letting their kids sort of find out what they're interested in and pursue their academic interests in their own way, in their own speed. Maybe that is the better model for public education. So I think I'm hoping, and who knows what'll happen. This is unprecedented, as everyone keeps saying, but I mean, the superintendent made the statement at the press at the announcement of the closure of the schools on April 6th. He touted the superintendent back during the 1918 flu epidemic, who was a woman at the time, evidently, and she said, this is the time for us to change public education forever. And after the flu epidemic was over, they instituted kindergarten and middle schools, and this is what Superintendent Reichdahl was touting as a great leap forward for public education. Well, that's just an expansion of public education. That's not a reform of it. Let's do something better than just expanding the existing program. Let's see what we can do better with less. I think that's definitely possible. We have a $16,000 per student now we're giving to the system, and the system is not providing much. It's certainly not $16,000 per student worth to their education right now. So, there are lots of other ways to educate children than we have created in our 150 years here. It's time for demands to improve what we do, and that has to come in an individualized way, Dave. So here we have parents all of a sudden. We've been calling for decentralizing the public schools for years, right? What we have now is a fully decentralized system. It's decentralized to every family. Every family is letting every child move along at his or her own speed. It's radical, So
yeah, and it's really illustrating the concept that the money's not following the child, whereas before there was always, hey, we're doing this for the children. Now you've got a lot of children out of school and the money's going to the system, but the children are left wondering what to do. Really a fascinating a time that you're in for your research, Liv. We've got a final question for Jason here. Jason, this is a question I think shared by a number of viewers, and we're going to be out of time, so it's going to have to be the last question. Jason, are you aware of any conversations in state government about expanding the definition of essential businesses, or finding ways like safety equipment requirements or something along those lines to allow more people to get back to work?
Yeah, so those conversations are occurring not only from stakeholders and trade groups, in particular the builders have been heavily lobbying the governor to do what almost every other state in the country is doing and allowing them to operate. We're one of only 5 states that deems construction as not an essential activity. Lawmakers are engaged in this conversation. In fact, the Senate Majority Leader Billig just did an interview yesterday with TVW talking about how they are in talks now with the governor about how to ramp back up economic activity. It's very unlikely going to be just everything at the same time, but looking at which of those industries, which type of activity can you start to phase in? Because I mean, the first thing we got to do is stop the spread of this virus and start to see it retreat. But then we've got to be able to make sure we get our economic activity moving again so that you can fund those essential services in the state government and people can make their own family budgets so we can take care of our own families. So yes, those conversations are happening and they will continue to increase, but don't have the expectation that on May 4th, everything's going to go back to the way it was. You're probably going to see it phased in.
I think there's some added frustration in the unequal ways in which businesses are being treated, businesses related to government priorities versus private sector priorities. But we can't address that now because we're out of time. Jason Mercier, the director of our Center for Government Reform, thank you so much for making the time today. Liv Finne, our director for our Center for Education, thank you. And I'd like to remind everybody that both Jason and Liv will be a part of our Solution Summit coming up April 14th and 15th. It's a 2-day event from 8 in the morning till about 11:30 a.m. The tickets for WPC members are free, so you just have to register online. If you're not a member, you should join, and then you'd get a ticket for free, or you'd register for free. But if you're not a member, tickets are only $10. It's a 2-day event. The center directors have some great guests. You'll be able to go online right now, go to washingtonpolicy.org, go to the event section, look at the Solution Summit. It's our first ever virtual Solution Summit. You can see the agenda and the topics that are wide and varied from each center director and their outstanding panel guests that will be there to discuss some of the key policy issues that are facing this state. And I'm sure they'll be addressing some of the implications of the COVID-19 crisis as well. So I'd encourage you to do that. And then also mark your calendars for April 22nd, Earth Day. We've got a great environmental webinar that explains how Todd Myers will be joining our YP group online to explain how it is that so many activists are claiming that they're going to save the planet and do various things through politics, but they're not actually accomplishing what their goals are. And Todd and his panel on the Earth Day event will explain how to actually make a positive difference by using individual choice and free market forces. So that's an exciting online event coming up as well. So thank you to all of you for listening and sticking with us through these technical difficulties. We'll do a little bit of editing of this particular broadcast to make it a little more listenable. For those of you who want to share it, you can watch for that on our webpage at washingtonpolicy.org. We'll put that audio up as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to have you join us again.
Thank you. Thank you.